Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. I have here a very special guest. This man has been in countless films, countless TV shows, worked with some of the greats in the industry like Wesley Snipes, Steven Seagal, Burt Reynolds, Tom Sizemore, Clint Eastwood. I mean, if I guarantee you somebody out there has seen a movie or a TV show that this man has been in, he's been hitting the action scene hard for over 30 years. Please welcome to the show, Robert LaSardo. Robert, how are you, my friend?
I'm well, brother. I'm well. Thank you for having me, Chip. I appreciate it.
Hey, man, it's an honor to have you because I've seen you in so many movies, especially coming up when I was a kid. You know, we'll get into some of the ones that you were in. That's some of my personal favorites. But obviously, when I was coming up, some of the action movies with Steven Seagal were really big, like Hard to Kill and Out for Justice. And then the first movie that when I started getting old enough to put faces to names and paying attention of who people were, was Drop Zone. And that was one you did with Gary Busey and Wesley Snipes. And for whatever reason, I know that it might not have been the biggest at the box office, but as a kid, I don't know if it was just the fact that people were jumping out of planes, but I loved that movie as a kid. I don't know why. It was fun to watch for me.
Yeah, we had a good time making it, man, too, down in Miami,
I bet you
South
did.
Beach, Key West, Key Largo. I mean, just pick a spot. And
Yeah.
one of the choice locations, man. We were there.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's what I want to kind of do today is go through some of your films because, like I said, you have a lot. We'll touch on a few of them here, but since it's your first time on the show, we'll kind of start with the original questions. You grew up in Brooklyn, correct?
That's right.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
and I mean, how was Brooklyn? Have you been back? Because you're in California now. Do you go back to New York very often?
No, I don't.
No, I was about to say compare Brooklyn to the 1970s to now. But if you don't go back, I guess that's going to be hard to do.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. Since you brought that up, I'll be brief. I spoke to a friend of mine, uh, someone I went to high school with in New York in the 70s, and she was telling me that unfortunately, because of what's been going on in the world, in the country, been a little turbulence out there.
Yeah.
Um, she said, Rob, check it out. She said, you remember how it was in the 70s in New York? How was this incredible, like this this very dynamic mixture of art, um, character, and violence? I said, yeah. And now it's like that, but take the art out of it and just focus on the violence and the other elements that are a bit nefarious and not so celebrated.
Yeah.
So you said it's worse than what I remember in the 70s because growing up in there and going on the trains, there were fights on the trains, there were no cameras, and it's always been a kind of in your face city.
Right.
But she told me she doesn't even want to leave the house right now, man, because she's afraid for her life. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually had to visit twice this year to do some work with the podcast with some guys up there I've done some filming with. And my mom is just like she I don't know if she's ever been out of South Carolina, to be quite honest. That's where I'm at. But she's like, "Oh, you got to be careful. You got to be careful." And I'm like, "I know I got to be careful, but I'm like you, man. Those subways, if it's after like 8 or 9 o'clock, brother, I'm Ubering or Lyfting. I mean, it's better to be safe than sorry. I don't have to prove nothing to nobody." And I mean, they just push. Sometimes they ain't even robbing you down there. They just pushing you right off the damn platform just for the hell of it to see which way you fall. I mean, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's the sad truth of it.
So you were coming up, you actually credit an English teacher for pushing you to acting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So how did that, what was the dynamic and how did she, get you to push towards acting?
She taught drama as an elective
Okay.
in conjunction with her English class. She pointed out to me that there was a school called the High School for Performing Arts, and that based on what she observed in her class, that I was a candidate to audition for that school.
Okay.
And so I got busy studying. I prepared 2 contemporary monologues, which was what the requirement was. The numbers were 2,000 applicants per year, and they picked 70.
Wow. And you were one of the
Yeah,
70.
yeah, but I was nervous. I was I was nervous, man.
But I mean,
I
like,
was I was
before you,
petrified waiting to go in there, man. I felt like I was going into a room to meet a firing squad, man, because you walk into a room, there's these elderly people with these very sophisticated and very knowing looks on their face.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you feel like they're watching your every move, and they probably were and are. And you got to disappear into character completely and forget about all that. Make it just poof, disappear, and just go there, man. And transport yourself into the material, into the play, to the script, whatever it is you're reading. You have to incarnate, become that, and then you know, it's like going to sleep, having a good dream or a bad dream, depending on how it goes.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting dynamic, the way you put that, like incorporate yourself into the character, because there's some actors and be it phenomenal actors, but for one, I'll use as an example, Kevin Bacon. He doesn't, to me, he is Kevin Bacon in every role he is. Like, that's just, he doesn't really change very much. He still was a great actor, but he acts it the same. But then there's other guys that change up the dynamic, be it the way they talk or their dialect, or, you know, if it's more of a villainous character, they'll kind of have a different tone to them. Did you find that easy to do? Because you've done that quite a bit throughout your career, because you played everywhere from drama to thriller to horror to, you know, everywhere in between. Did you find that easy to be able to put yourself into different character modes? Was there a hard switch, or did you find that pretty easy?
Well, I graduated through several phases of that.
Okay.
When I was younger, I carried a lot of rage, like a lot of young men do, a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
So conjuring characters that were living in that psychic dynamic was not that hard for me, because I was already there.
Right.
It's just about shifting the gears, whether they want me to move fast or slow, speak with an accent or whatever. Someone said to me, I never believed it at the time, that said, Robert, when you get older and you evolve a bit, you start to evolve, become a little more sensitive, and become more in touch with your feelings, it's going to feel more like a stretch for you to play characters that are a bit tortured, aggressive, and not doing productive things. And I never believed it until I found myself later on in life feeling like it was a stretch for me to bring to life some of these characters, man, that were clearly maladjusted type people in a circumstance, whether they were in charge of something or not, running things or being run by something, running towards something, death, or running toward a person to harm. It felt when we were done that my mind and my heart needed to go through a period of reformation, man. I don't want to make it sound too religious, but I almost felt like I had to go see a priest or a rabbi to get an exorcism, man, because it start to permeate. And I didn't like how it made me feel, man. I felt like I needed to take a shower and I couldn't wash it off at some time. So to answer your question, people would meet me in the street sometimes, they start talking, they go, man, they look at me funny, like you're nothing like what I imagined you. And so one of my friends who was a therapist, who used to talk to me quite a bit because I was in therapy for a while. I think any actor who goes deep enough requires a therapist in their little bag of tricks. Yeah. And he used to say, it's like a possession, Rob. When I watch you on screen, it's not the person I treat or the person I know. It's a possession. And I'd watch some of my stuff and I'd go, oh, that's what we did. That's what I did. But that's me, is it? Because my behavioral patterns and my tendencies in day-to-day life are not what I'm witnessing. So yeah, I'm creating something that my acting teacher enforced and was very deliberate about. He said, do not create a self-portrait. And so it all depends on who you talk to, Chip. Some people found me to be very poetic, sensitive, and really soft on the inside. Others found me to be a bit eccentric, weird, and crazy. So it all depends on who you talk to.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess
in terms of who Robert LaSardo is, and then watching the paradigm shift into this characterization, they go, whoa, that's not the Robert I know. And others would say, oh, get to know him a little bit better.
Right.
You know, it all depends. It's subjective, man.
And you mentioned, you know, kind of a possession there. I think I've heard you say in past interviews, because I've done a lot of research on you this week and prep for this. The Exorcist that you've seen at a young age made quite an impression on you.
Oh, I thought it was going to be the end of me, Chip. Oh man, I don't think I slept well for about a year.
Yeah. You want to know, and not, this is a hit to me because I consider myself to be a pretty big movie buff. Like I've watched a lot of films. My DVD collection is ungodly. We're talking probably around 7,000 plus.
Woo!
The only
I'm
reason
a
I
fan.
stopped,
I'm a fan. You're a film historian. God
yeah,
bless you, my son. God bless you. I love it.
yeah. The only reason I really stopped is because everything kept going digital, and so it's just easier to have it where you can just click a button instead of having to dig it out your wall.
They
But
got me too. They got me too.
yeah,
I thought I'm never going to succumb to this. And I did.
yeah,
They got me. Yeah.
and make it so easy. But I only recently watched Exorcist start to finish about a year ago. And even now, like I'd always heard, I would I love horror movies. And, that's always usually the number one horror movie is The Exorcist. But every time I started to watch it, it was like it was a slow burn at start, but then obviously it picks up. So I think that slow burn was just a little hard for me to get through. But once I just made my mind up, I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and watch this all the way through. And even then, like now, all these years later, that thing still is creepy. I mean, when she's like grabbing that crucifix and, doing what she was doing with it and saying your mother sucks cocks in hell. And I was just like, my God, I can see where the outcry of just people, I can see where people would leave the theaters on that. I mean, it is because it's towing the line of not just horror, but like stuff that can actually or has been known to possibly happen. I'll put it like that. It's not like it's a ghost or something like that that's unrealistic. That stuff has happened before.
William Friedkin, William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, did
Yep.
something I think genius in the beginning of that film. He started the film in black frame, and then you heard this Islamic prayer, God is great, in the Islamic prayer, and yeah, and then all of a sudden the red lettering appeared before the screen, and you heard this man, you know, this guttural chant in Arabic. And I think for American audiences, because you got to remember, it was a different social climate back in those days, and also United States social political dynamic, the collective psyche was a bit different in terms, I think, of religious fundamentalism. And so I think to witness, I wouldn't say an attack, but a challenge on the faith, and use this idea of the devil at war with the innocents or to the raping of innocents, and then integrate that in the very beginning of the film with the ruins in Iraq, where the priest, Father Marin, is doing an archaeological dig, and he comes across these ruins, and he finds the head of the Pazuzu, and he has this look of dread and mortal terror on his face. And the man that's working with him on the dig asks him, "Not of the same period, Father?" And he's kind of dug up something, I think, which is symbolic of what's to come. He's going to basically do battle with the idea of the Pazuzu, the demon that's going to possess the girl later in the film. So to me, just the intro alone was, I think, lent itself to tremendous ingenuity by, because I have friends of mine who are Muslim, and they did not particularly like the fact that prayer, that chant, God is great, was being layered over the idea of something ominous,
Right.
and that we lived in a time back in the 70s where, there was and there continues to be, unfortunately, a divide amongst faith and stuff like that. And I think she was like, I don't understand why they're using this prayer and letting it run tandem with the idea of evil manifesting in the Middle East. And this man, Caucasian man, is digging up something in that land, and the idea that he's marrying it to a place that's supposed to be a holy place, and yet digging up, if you dig deep enough, you're going to find the Babylonian deity called the Pazuzu in the ground. And and it's almost like you're knocking on the devil's door, and don't knock too much because the door's going to open and the Pazuzu's going to come out next thing you know. Or this idea that the priest, Father Marin, was just simply able psychically to recognize that a war was coming,
Right.
and he was going to be the commander in that army to wage war against the ultimate enemy, I guess, in terms of the Christian Catholic faith, this idea of Satan, the devil.
You actually have that tattooed on you, right? That Pazuzu?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely an impact made. And when I was looking into that, what you had said about the what'd you say, a Babylonian, what was that last part of it?
Babylonian deity, the Pazuzu, yeah, the statue in the beginning. Because basically, what he does in the beginning of the movie, the Father Marin walks up to a mountaintop. He's looking around, and William Friedkin was really clever in the way he used symbolism. He had a dog, two dogs fighting.
Yeah.
One was black, one was white, and the priest heard this growling sound, and he looked down. He saw the two dogs fighting, and another dog, a third dog, just ran past because that dog was neutral, did not want to be involved in this idea of conflict. Then he looked over and saw a man watching him, an Arabic man staring at him, wondering why he was there. And then he looked up and he saw the Pazuzu statue of, he looked up at it and it was kind of glaring down at him. And the camera pans down the body, the wings, the hand up, down to the lower part of the body, the midriff, and where the genitals should be as a serpent. And then he kept cutting back and forth for the dogs fighting, him staring at the Pazuzu, and then he did this wide two shot of Father Marin on one side, the Pazuzu on the other, and he basically lays out these two are going to, you can see in the symbolism that these two are going to face off, and below in the matrix, so the world below them, this is the spiritual world above on the mountaintop, right?
Right.
Below is the world of flesh and blood and beings, because we battle not with just flesh and blood, but with principalities and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So below is the conflict of the world. So in the first few frames of the movie, William Friedkin geniusly sets the stage for this spiritual conflict if you pay attention to the archetypes, what the
Yeah.
Pazuzu means, what he represents in the faith, and these dogs fighting one another, and the growling sound, this guttural like sound of ripping and tearing and bestial nature of mankind at war with itself down below.
And that's one reason why I was looking forward to doing this interview, because there's not too many people that are going to grasp all the aspects of what he did. They see a scene that's just prepping them for the movie and they don't grasp all that. And I'm one of those people that I do look deeper, maybe sometimes too deep, or maybe I might even see things that aren't there. I take my own symbolism to certain things, but that's one thing that's always fascinated me about movies, is because you don't always know every single thing. Some things the directors leave up for each person for their own interpretation. And that's one thing that's cool about movies, that sometimes it might even be an inside joke that they put something in there for them that they know that nobody else has a clue for. I mean, Quentin Tarantino's been synonymous for doing little things like that, throughout all of his movies, with things that just kind of either carry over, or maybe it even be a last name, or the big kahuna stuff. I mean, I love all those little nuances that the maybe not so average fan will pick up on.
Stanley Kubrick, I think, was the grandfather of that, and probably a lot of film directors like the one you mentioned probably follow suit with
Yeah.
respect to Stanley Kubrick, because he would leave Easter eggs throughout
Yeah.
his, his movies for you to kind of read into, or project onto. William Friedkin also said, whatever you bring to The Exorcist in terms of your belief system, etc., is what you take away from it.
Right. Well, speaking of dogs, you actually spent a little time in the Navy, and 2 out of your 4 years, I think it was, you actually spent was training attack dogs.
Yeah, I was I guess, I was, just to put it simply, I was a police officer, I was a cop. And I was sent to Lackland Air Force Base for certification with a dog. His name was King. They tattooed his serial number, I think C184. And they sent King and I from Alaska, my duty base. I was stationed in the Aleutian Islands the first couple of years, and they want to know if who would want to volunteer to be part of this canine unit. And I volunteered, and they selected me, and they flew me down there. And I went through a 7-week certification course in Lackland down there in San Antonio. Got certified with the dogs, flew me back, and then next thing I know, I'm on a listening post in the middle of this Bering Sea near Siberia, and we're doing special ops with the dogs, and playing war games with the UDT SEALs coming up there, because back during those days, the thinking was if the Russians would invade, they come through the Aleutians. So there was an air base up there where I was at, and they had all these planes and stuff, and nuclear weapons, and marine compound up there, and we had the dogs up there and everything, and we do everything from checking the luggage for drugs to arresting people, and or doing basic perimeter watches,
Wow.
stuff like that.
What were the dogs? German Shepherds?
My dog was half Shepherd and half Doberman. He's a beautiful dog.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
half
he's a
Doberman.
beautiful dog.
Now, were you an animal lover before that? Did you get along with dogs or?
Yeah, I did. I actually did. I liked animals, and I had a great affection for this dog. Him and I were really, one of those things. They throw you in the cage with the animal, and learn quickly to become friends or else. I mean, I was afforded
Yeah.
the luxury of getting to know the dog prior to going to school. A lot of the other guys in class, they threw him in the cage with these dogs that were a bit ornery
Mm.
and ready to bite you. And the thing is this, the instructors would basically explain to all of us in class to just learn not to show fear to the dog, because the dog can smell fear and just bite you. So I was already had a relationship going on with the dog. When I first met the dog, though, I had to kind of win him over. So whether I like dogs or not, I had to learn quickly to become involved in that relationship for the sheer sake of my duty.
Right. Okay. So when you get out of the Navy, was it kind of focusing on your acting career at that point? Was it kind of hammered down in that direction, or what was your outlook there?
I'm not sure the creative aspect of self ever left me.
Yeah.
I was making phone calls from up there, way up there, down to the lower 48 to New York, talking to a good friend of mine who's been like a surrogate father to me, Anthony Abeson, who was my acting teacher at the High School of Performing Arts and went on to train me even after the Navy. And I was calling him while I was in the Navy because I saw some things and went through some changes, man. I just needed somebody to talk to. And he
Mhm.
always reminded me of what we experienced together in school, on stage, performing. He took me back to a very innocent place in my mind, in my heart, and in my creativity that I was felt that was drifting away from me, or I had pushed it away because of the identity crisis that a lot of men battle with. And what am I going to do? Who am I? I didn't leave performing arts going, yeah, I'm going to run off to Hollywood, become a movie star. I was too busy trying not to go crazy and trying to stay out of trouble. So I knew going into the military would straighten my butt out. It did. But I also felt as time went on, there was this emptiness that was inside me getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I needed to fill it with something, or I had lost something, like a lost love. And I was trying, like Dante in the Inferno, trying to climb up out of the hole up to the purgatory and then up to the paradise of truth, which was my calling, which I had ignored or I did not understand. And he was like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He explained to me without pushing it, without trying to sell me anything, that there was something going on with me that I wasn't even aware of. But when I went on stage, it was clear to people observing me that there was something I could do and was quite capable of.
Wow. Now, your first role was that a China Girl? Was that your first one?
You did do your homework, didn't you, Chip? You did your
I
homework.
did.
That
And
is correct. That
well,
is,
done by
and
Abel
you win
Ferrara.
$5,000. Yeah.
I'll take it. And Abel Ferrara done that, which you would go on to work with
Wow.
him again later on with,
Yep.
films like he did King of New York and I think Bad Lieutenant.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
so, and that's a pretty cool thing that I see too. A lot of times, like when people first come on and you land with a director, I'm assuming if they like you and they get along with you and you have a rapport, lots of times you will get repeat, I guess, business or, a repeat chance at working with them. Because, like I said, you worked with him on that, and then you were in King of New York with Christopher Walken, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I think it serves on both sides because finally having to sit in this seat, the director's seat, you want to work with people that who can deliver.
Right.
Casting can be is tedious and
Yeah.
can be just a headache all in itself because you want to make sure you're hiring the right people, and you want to make sure also if the project's worth anything in terms of what you're creating, that the people have an affection for and are truly committed to it. Once a director recognizes that they're working with actors who not only do the work but are committed 110% on all levels, they find some element of it, personalize it. The ones that are truly artistic directors, not just technical directors, the ones who love film the way you love movies, the way I love movies. I think they appreciate any artist, male or female,
Yeah.
that takes it to that level and they want to work with them again. If there's a role that they feel that they can pull off, why not go to someone you know who can deliver rather than haggle around with potential possibility, wondering, oh man, I hope they can, when push comes to shove, when we go to combat, they can really, stand up in the line of fire, because there's a big difference between simulation, auditioning, and
Mhm.
act, and then doing it in front of the camera. People don't realize that there are people that do real good with testing, and then you put them out in the field, man, and they ain't worth shit. So I
Yeah.
think it's sort of like this idea that some of us function much better under fire than we do in simulation. And I'm one of those. I function real well under fire. You put me in simulation, I'm just like, oh man, I'm not. It's just, some people, they're real good at that, and I think directors want to make sure. That's why they have you come back several times. You get a call back after your audition. You get another call back. They want to make sure, from the point of view of casting, the producers, directors, before they're willing to spend money on this person, that they can repeat more or less the same disposition of character and authenticate it with such conviction that they go, whoa, he or she made a different choice this time, and it's just as effective. So it wasn't just a fluke. They didn't just get lucky that day. They can keep doing it, because the movie takes how long to make it, right? So it's not one scene. If you're going to do multiple scenes throughout the feature, they want to know that you can stand, have the endurance to manifest that particular character they've written for you.
Right. And I
With
think
you in
that,
mind.
and that speaks to what you said, when you develop that relationship and you know people that will and can deliver. I think that's a lot of when you look through great directors like Martin Scorsese, for instance. He's worked countless times with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro together in movies like Goodfellas and Casino, and then lately The Irishman, that was a big release here a couple of years ago, Netflix exclusive. He knows what he's going to get out of those guys. Now, at that point in time, as great as Al Pacino's career has been, and as great as Marty Scorsese's careers have been, they had never worked together until The Irishman. So even though you have two great people, that don't always mean that they're going to mix well with ideas and that it's going to come together on film. Did you see The Irishman?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of it?
I
From
enjoyed it.
I
I
did too.
enjoyed it.
But
Yeah,
now
and
I
I've heard
went
some
into
people.
that.
I don't pay attention to critics, none of that crap. But I've heard some people comment about it and say, yeah, it was kind of long. And I said, I didn't notice the time. I was too involved in it to notice the time.
Exactly. And I think people may have, because I'm a big gangster movie fan. I love the gangster movies, but I think that was what hindered it a little bit, because I think people went into that movie expecting like a Goodfellas 2 or somewhat, you know what I'm saying? More of a gangster element. And it was, to me, it was more of a political film. And I'm like you, I didn't even notice the time. I mean, after it was over, I could say, yeah, God, I started this 17 hours ago. But as the film went on, not one point did I ever look at my watch or say, all right, I'm going to finish this later. I mean, it was just, it grabbed you all the way through and it kept you there. And to me, that's the mark of a good film. Because when you get to those hour-long marks or 3 hour-long mark movies, you have to be able to keep an ass in a seat if it's going to be successful.
Agreed. Yeah. It runs the opposite end of the duality. You ever watch a film and go, man, I hope this movie, I don't want this movie to end.
Yeah.
But you get into it, and then it ends like, oh man.
Yeah. You got to
Yeah,
figure out that sweet spot.
yeah, man. So to me, best of both worlds is to have something that goes long enough where you feel like you ate a hearty meal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't leave the table going, oh man, I wish I would like another bite of that.
Yeah.
I wish it would be
Now,
just a little bit more.
now, a little bit later, you land a movie with Richard Pryor, Moving.
Right.
How did that feel to get that? I mean, because at that time, Richard Pryor was big. I mean, he was on fire. Well, I'm assuming that was a little bit before my time, but I've got to think at that time he was a big name in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, Richard still is in my mind. Certain people transcend the timeline.
Right. And
Their
he
legacy.
was one of those, like one of the first movies I remember from Richard Pryor coming up was The Toy.
Right.
Because as a kid, that was one of the first movies
Jackie
I
Gleason.
seen. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
him and
Jackie
Jackie
Gleason,
Gleason.
Scott Schwartz, I think, was the kid in there. But then later on, I seen him in films like Harlem Nights and Hear No Evil, See No Evil, and Brewster's Million and stuff like that. So I got to experience more of his films, as I got a little older. But you actually developed, a little bit of a friendship with Richard. Didn't he like invite you to your house or invite you to his
Yeah,
house for a
yeah.
boxing match?
Yes, he did actually. It was Sugar Ray Hagler fight. We were on set one day. He said, "Robert, what are you doing next week?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm going to the Oscars." I was, stuck in the hotel in Universal City, man, doing nothing, staring at the wall. And he said, "Well, you want to come over to my house and watch the fight?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Twist my arm. And
Wow.
but just a quick history lesson for people who might not know that Richard Pryor, man, he changed the game. Him and Red Fox were
Yeah.
crucial in terms of a game change and a shifting in perception, because I think they got tired of being locked up in a box. And so Richard, went up against certain powerful people and decided to take his act in a direction that might be perceived as controversial. He did just that, and I think he definitely paved the way for so many young comedians to follow suit, Eddie Murphy especially, and then the rest, so that they weren't being told by a certain community of Hollywood to keep it clean or do your thing a certain way. So him and Red Fox, Richard Pryor, were groundbreaking in their approach to stand up as they progressed and evolved and were allowed, and even if they weren't allowed, like, whatever, I'm going to do it anyway. And then to meet someone who was so personable to me when I was going through a stage in my life where I didn't know up from down, left from right, and identity crisis still, despite the fact that I got hired to be in this film, and I was in Hollywood under contract with Warner Brothers for 3 months. A year prior to that, I was in the military, man. So it was surreal. I couldn't believe that it was even happening. We sat down and do the script read through. Dana Carvey was there, a whole host of actors, man. Richard Pryor was there, Alan Metter, who directed Back to School, Rodney Dangerfield, he was there. All of them watching us. Stuart Cornfeld, who went on to produce a lot of the Ben Stiller movies, he was
Yeah.
there. So I'm sitting at this king's table,
Yeah.
a very humble subject, shaking pretty much, or trying not to shake, and read through this thing and not show any cracks in my armor, so that because you never know, right?
Right.
And so that part was it was a bit frightening to me. But once I got past the fear and I was able to overcome that and just get into the damn thing, and saw that people were being nice to me and saying very supportive things I needed to hear, that people weren't telling me where I grew up, and people around me that was supposed to be my caretakers were not giving me any real positive reinforcement. People that I didn't hardly know were telling me things. They're whispering in my ear little things. Hey, Robert, hey, Robert, hey, Robert, hey, Robert. And I didn't realize until years later the significance of these comments that were made to me. I did realize, though, because love is love. You feel it. Either
Mm-hmm.
someone loves you or they don't. And I felt that Richard clearly had an affection for me. And he said some things to me that cemented in my consciousness, very similar to what my acting teacher, Anthony Abeson, had suggested very strongly, about persistence, commitment, and not for nothing. And that there was something going on that I had to be respectful to and honor it. And Richard pointed it out to me as well. And he saw it. I was probably the only one who couldn't see it. So it was the acting teacher, it was the English teacher, then my Anthony Abeson at Performing Arts, and then Richard Pryor, this living legend, whispered in my ear some things that nobody in my life, other than my acting teacher and this English teacher, had suggested to me in the possibility of what was for the takings, more or less, in terms of a career.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't believe it, until I started believing it. And when I started believing it, my whole life changed. And so it wasn't just the movie that was, auspicious and this incredible event for me and a stamp of approval and showing me that it was possible, but it was what was said to me during that process, because it's not on every Hollywood movie you go on where people are personable like that. People are so enveloped with their own ego trips most of the time that they don't even see you, man. They're too busy looking at themselves. That's just the nature of the beast, right? So to have someone step outside themselves and express that kind of affection in a human way in a world that's become so subhuman,
Yeah.
even then, because Hollywood's Hollywood, right? It was a gift from God, man. And Richard, and God was talking through Richard in the form of love and mercy and no judgment. He didn't care about my tattoos because I had gotten so much flack, Chip, when I was going on auditions after I got out of the Navy, showing up at auditions, and the agent was always getting the feedback, well, Robert's really talented, but you got a problem with those tattoos, man. So I lost a lot of jobs in the first year of auditioning. Like his talent is probably more apparent than most of the people we saw today. But there's a scene where he's got to take his shirt off. He's got all these tats all over his body, and we can't hire him. And so I started to lose faith in what my acting teacher was telling me. He simply said, Robert, I said, yeah, keep your shirt on. You know, he's like, all right, keep my shirt on. You know, I got the joke. And then I just kept persisting. And then eventually, once I'm there in Hollywood, I'm realizing, you know what? Don't pay attention to none of that noise about the ink, because it wasn't cool back in the 80s to have tattoos. It wasn't trendy. Dennis Rodman hadn't showed up to the basketball court yet. None of these young men and women that are all beautiful weren't tapping up their neck. There was none of that around. So to walk around in public looking the way I did, people looked at me funny. They wanted either afraid of me, say things to me like, "Oh my God, you're so smart, but your tattoos don't do you any justice." You know, people constantly throwing rocks at me and then running away, or these backhanded compliments, and show up at auditions, and casting director would be like, "Oh, excuse me, the messenger engine's around back," like I'm some homunculus, man. And it hurt at first, and then I built a skin to deal with it. You have to either do or die, like combat.
Yeah.
And I just developed a thick skin. I just kept going, man. I just kept going. And I remember what Richard told me, and I put my blinders on. I focused on the goal and the task, and I didn't listen to anybody. And I would suggest that to anybody out there who wants to do something, don't listen to anybody except the voice that comes from your higher power that says to you, do this, because your heart feels to do that. Not your mind, your heart and your soul are driven to go toward a certain place. I don't care about the ministry of logic. There is no logic in show business. There is no logic in creativity. There's only a love affair with the art form and commitment to that art form. And then you manifest something. People go, wow, did you see that? That's what it's about.
And that's a great point, because I mean, I think society has gotten a little better at accepting it, because it is a little bit more mainstream and in your face now, with especially with the dawn age of social media. But you made a great point, like Rodman hadn't showed up on the scene in basketball by that point. He was like your first bad boy of basketball, and you really, I mean, that I can remember, was one of the first ones in Hollywood doing it. You were doing that shit before it was cool. It's cool now, but you were doing that shit way before them. I mean,
yeah, by 1985, I was discharged from the Navy. I had full sleeves. I didn't just have a giant tattoo on my chest. I had full sleeves. I had one on my hand. I was covered, man. So it wasn't like I had one big one. I had, someone say, "How many tattoos you have?" I said, "Well, it starts here and ends up down here somewhere." And I make them laugh, because you got to find humor in this thing, man.
When you got sleeves, you start to have to point out like each section is like, well, that's one that it's all really one big piece of artwork. That's is what it is. I'm saying.
I took my cue from a biker buddy of mine, may he rest in peace. He said, "Rob, just tell me you got one big one."
Yeah, that's a bit. Yeah, that's it. I got one big one. It's called me.
One big, especially for chicks. Hey, how many tattoos? I got one big one, man.
Oh, that's funny. So you do land, as we mentioned earlier. I said you worked with Steven Seagal. You landed Hard to Kill, and then later on Out for Justice. Out for Justice, to me, for my money, was a very, I guess, it didn't get the recognition I don't think it deserved. It was really good. William Forsythe acted his ass off in that movie. What was your experience like on those sets working with Steven Seagal?
Well, the genesis of that was akin to what I described with my situation or my experience with Richard Pryor. Steven was very personable with me. I walked into the audition at Warner Brothers studio, and he just started a conversation with me right after my audition. He said, "You know what I think?" He looked at the director and said, "I think this young man's a consummate actor." Didn't say nothing about my ink. I mean, at that point, I was showing him all up. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was wearing short sleeve shirts. He didn't mention nothing about it. And then we did Hard to Kill, and then I was on set with him and Kelly. He was married to Kelly LeBrock at the time. Yeah.
Yep.
And then after we were in between takes, he just started talking to me. He asked me about the tattoos and my life and stuff. And I was talking to his wife, and we were having a conversation. He said, "Listen, I'm going to make this movie about these guys in Brooklyn, man. I got this screenplay I'm putting together, and there's going to be a role in there for it." Like, okay, cool. And a year later, man, I get a phone call from my agent, and they're like, "Steven Seagal wants you to meet him and his director." So he's one of these rare occurrences where somebody actually does what they say, and he did, man. And I went down there. I went uptown. I was in New York at the time, and I met the director, met Steven, and It was a handshake and a couple of words, a little improv, and that was it. Left 2 weeks later. Guess who's going to Hollywood again? I got the job. And so Steven took an affection to me early on. And then we made Out for Justice, man. Had a ball doing that. Had a great time doing it.
Anybody seen Richie? Anybody seen Richie?
Yeah. Billy and Billy Ford, I call him Billy. Me and William, we run into each other here and there. We've done some other stuff together, and we did some conventions overseas in Europe. And he was running through. He was coming out of the elevator. I think it was in Germany. Where were we in Germany? He goes, "Where's Bobby?" Because they call me Bobby. Hey, where's Bobby? Because he heard I was there. So after all these years, just to see him and to reconnect like that, it was beautiful, man.
Yeah,
reunion. It was a lot of water under the bridge.
Yeah, for sure. And William's another great actor, man. You guys are like those cogs that are so important to movies that keep them going, because when you see him, he's like, oh, I was showing a guy at work today. I was like, this is him interviewing. He's like, God, he looks familiar. What's he been in? And I'm like, I don't have the rest of the day to tell you all the shit he's been in. He's been in a lot of stuff. And it's just, those key components are just so important because, much like you, Forsyth himself is, can do very different types of roles. Did you find a one that you kind of more zeroed in on? Did you like, more action stuff? Because at that point you hadn't really got into much of the horror yet. You kind of done that later in the career, but were you fine with doing that, or was you wanting to experience some different type of work?
What I wanted to experience and what happened, I dare say, were two different things, man.
Right.
It's kind of like, when you go to work and stuff, the boss tells you what to do. You don't tell the boss what you want to do. And then you find a way to own it, to love it, to make it yours, to believe in it. It's a faith, bro. It's a forced attrition. You have to find something in it to care about. Otherwise, you're a fraud, you're a hack, you're pretending, you're not really going to the place. So I went to a lot of places, visited a lot of worlds in terms of character. Had nothing to do with my background, nothing to do with whatever Robert is, for the sheer sake of what I was taught on stage. No self-portrait. So I don't know. I think recently I wrote and directed my own movie called American Trash. Is the closest thing I feel to me being true to the artistic requirements, because I've been painted a certain way by a perception, a subjective projection that has nothing to do with my ability, but a lot to do with my appearance. And I'm not mad about it because it's a visual medium, man.
Right.
People want to look at pretty people. They want to look at pretty men, pretty women, pretty whatever, or ugly something scary, So it's a visual medium. So a lot of it has to do with, like you were saying, who because if a director likes you and you got the corporation behind you, you're good to go. Robert Rodriguez shows up and Quentin Tarantino shows up and they say, we're going to anoint you. You're anointed. Your name becomes household. But these people that you mentioned before, connected to the Scorsese movies, I dare say, with respect to their talents, because they're hugely talented, man, I don't know if they'd have the career they have right now had it not been for that rock star genius director, this auteur, who showed up and said, you know what, I'm going to anoint thee, put thee in several of my movies, and because I'm going to be this Academy Award-winning director, you're going to come for the ride with me. So people have to understand that if you're an independent and you don't have the power of the gang, like in the joint, in the joint prisons is all gangs. You got these guys, those guys, never, you got to belong to a gang because you have power in the gang. It's like Hollywood's the same way, man. In that sense, there's power in certain circles that decide, for whatever reason, that they want to push or promote something. It could be acculturism, it could be whatever. But when you have the power of the group, and that group those people have access to the money, you ascend rather quickly because you're connected to that. If you don't have that, then you kind of have to, like somebody in prison, independent, you have to fight on your own without the support of the group, because there's strength in numbers.
Right.
And the politic play of that. And I've always been an independent, man. I had nobody other than Pryor, Steven Seagal, and Ryan Murphy briefly with Nip Tuck, and what's his name, a good buddy of mine, David Caruso, who decided to put me on CSI Miami because we were in China Girl together.
Right.
He always liked me. We did NYPD Blue together. I saw I saw little traces of what can happen when you have a friend who knows your talent and your capability and is in a position of power who can lift you through the ceiling, because you get to a point, I don't care how talented you are, Chip, you go on 5,000 auditions and nail them all. You reach a ceiling, even and you get jobs. You can do all the drop zones you want, but you get to a ceiling, you hit a ceiling. And unless some entity reaches through this, I'm using symbolism, reaches through the ceiling here and pulls you up to the next level, you just don't get promoted, man.
Right.
That's the political element. And there, anybody says there ain't no political element doesn't know the industry. So
Right.
in a sense, it is who you know. A big part of it is who you know, but it's also what you know, meaning the people that are going to promote you recognize that you have an ability to do something. But you can have ability all day, man. And if the right person is not in a position of power to bring you to what people call some next level stuff, you're
Right.
not getting to the next level. You stay stuck in the Charlie Manson cage in purgatory because of perception of being pariah, the outcast, the devil, the one, the evil one that has to stay in a stasis so that we can sell something. And
Mm-hmm.
so in that sense, I've had to digest that philosophy, even though it has nothing to do with me, you know. So I would say, to the point is that you asked me if there was something in particular, I say no, other than my own work, my own creation, something that I wrote from my heart that I needed after 35 years, wanted to communicate in a screenplay, use my own money and hire actors that I felt could deliver. And now I feel, you know, regardless of the result, whether people like the movie, it's in post-production now, whether they like it or not, at least I can tell when I go to, you know, acting school heaven or whatever, you know, when I leave this world and I'm faced by the jury of peers who say, so Robert, what did you do with your life? You know, we saw you did some things, but do you feel, honestly, sitting here or standing here before us, that you really feel that you pay tribute to the art form? I'd say no, until I made an apology toward, at this stage in my career, for committing sedition against the art form, treason, and allowing myself willfully to take contracts that did not demonstrate what I feel and a lot of people feel were art. It's more like thrill rides of entertainment that
Mm-hmm.
involve a sort of masochism or sadism of violence, you know. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. People like to watch violent movies. They like to watch action movies. They get into that sort of thing. They want to see the devil. They want to see something go bang. They want to see, you know, that kind of stuff. But I would say, in my heart, being sensitive and poetic in the way I view movies, because I watch movies. I don't watch a lot of the stuff that I'm in. I watch movies that people probably would never suspect that I would watch. I watch these slice of life movies, you know, about regular everyday people going through extraordinary situations and have to overcome them. Kind of like my life. I can relate
Right.
to real people. So I wanted to write a story that deals with real people thrown into a very turbulent world of Los Angeles as it's fallen into ruin, helter skelter, you know, the trash, the pollution, the violence, the whatever. And somebody gets killed, and how do you deal with the loss? How do people either come together to heal one another, or how do they find a way not to increase on that chaos, man? So I feel like my career has been lessons in barbarism and chaos. I wanted to show that in my own way, but then find a resolution to it and reclamation for the character so that it doesn't always have to be, well, he ends up in hell, you know.
Right.
You know, what about love? What about forgiveness? What about mercy? What about character growth? All humans face temptations in their lives. So I
Absolutely.
want to create a situation with characters that are human, not superheroes, but in the way that they face tragedy and face violence in a realistic way. They have to make significant choices that are going to change their lives forever, because people deal with that every day. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, how do I tell a story like that, make it entertaining, and also without pushing a message, because I'm not preaching, but have a profundity present in the story, in the writing, that people can go, wow, man, I feel that. That dude was in combat. He came back from the war, and he fell in love with this girl, and she kind of changed him, you know, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But before that, though, he didn't see the world the same way. The war messed him up over there. He saw things that no human should ever see. And he hasn't been right since then, you know. And then he finds love, or love finds him and anoints him the possibility of liberation from that hell, man. And I think as an artist, for me, a lot of us want to liberate ourselves
Right.
because we're striving for perfection in the art form so we can be free, not so we can be weighed down with some nonsense. It's not communicating anything, man, that has any meaning, man, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, how long do you have?
Huh?
How long do you have time
To
wise?
live? I don't know. Maybe I hope I live till maybe tomorrow. I don't
No,
know how
no,
long I have left. Maybe
for
we'll
the
see.
for the
I
interview
can make it to the new year.
for the interview.
As long as you need me, man, I'm here. I'm not going nowhere. I'm snowed in, bro. There's snow out there. I
I
can't
thought
even
there
go
was
anywhere.
snow on there. Okay, because
Yeah,
you
I'm in the Shining right now.
okay. We touched on earlier drop zone, and I wanted to circle back for a little bit for people that don't know. Obviously, you guys were a team of hijackers that would go down and get the information of what was it, U.S. or federal agents or undercover federal agents.
Yeah.
At the Yancey Butler, Wesley Snipes, Gary Busey. Gary Busey's always just high energy and entertaining. What was that like on that set? That seemed like that would have been a fun one to do.
Oh man. Yeah, it was. It was the energy was just everything you just said.
Yeah.
High energy. Uh, Gary was on fire, and Wesley was very zen, but he was on fire too in his own very Buddhist way.
Yeah.
And the two of them, I think, found some type of balance between the polarities, the two
Yeah.
extremes, because they had to go at it, And
Yeah.
Wesley was another one who took an affection for me because I'd known Wesley from King of New York,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
went
Oh,
out to dinner.
I forgot all
Yeah,
about him being in King of New York.
yeah.
Wow.
And so watching them together was interesting to me because I saw them deal with what a lot of men deal with. They're if you're the alpha and leading a group of people, you got to kind of find a way to lead without abusing that power, and so that you don't become corrupt, whether it's the character or behind the scenes. So it's interesting to watch people deal with the Vanity Fair while we're filming. Yeah. So, but it was everyone. I think at the end of the day, walked away from that movie feeling pretty good. We all had a good time, and I got to see some things that were really mind blowing. I went out to dinner with the Wesley Snipes one night in South Beach back in the day, and then Sylvester Stallone walked in. And I thought, Wesley would jump up and give him a hug, and they'd shake hands or something. They didn't even look at each other, man. He walked right past them like he didn't exist. I thought, okay, maybe Demolition Man was such a cool experience. Who knows?
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't know when that was, but maybe that Demolition Man didn't go like they wanted.
Well, the gentleman that was one of Wesley's trainers, his martial arts trainer, was telling me that when they were doing some of the fight sequences, that Stallone was a little bit nervous when Wesley started kicking.
Yeah.
Watch easy on the kick in there, Wes. He didn't like when Wesley kicks. And then Gary, I think he wanted me to go to dinner one night, and this was kind of like one of these things where like I'm in jail again, and I got to choose which crew I'm going to, car I'm going to roll in, because I said, "You okay, Wes?" He says, "Yeah, I'm fine, man." I said, because we had that fight sequence, Wesley and I. I said, "I didn't do anything wrong," because there was one scene I had a kick, and I actually made contact with his fingers. I felt really bad.
That was out there at the bathroom when he went out there to save Swoop, because what's the name was roughing up Swoop in the bathroom.
Yeah, and at the end of the film, in the staircase, we have a fight sequence, and when I was kicking on those metal metal bars there, I caught his hand there, and I felt bad about it. He said, "Don't worry, man. I'm not worried about it. I'm not concerned about you, because him and Gary had to get it on. So I don't know if all I can say is that they worked it out."
Yeah. Did you actually skydive any during that movie, or?
Yeah, I skydived after the movie, not during. They wouldn't
Okay.
let us skydive because of insurance issues.
Right.
But I did hear there was a rumor though that Wesley went up anyway and he jumped just so he could feel what it was like. And I think
I've heard that insurance purposes keeps a lot of people from doing that. I think one of the only ones that I've heard of in past movies was, I think Swayze was able to pull it off during Point Break because he absolutely refused to not do it at least once. I think it was the end when they jumped out of the plane, like at the very end of the movie, when they left Keanu up there with no chute. I think that was an actual jump by Swayze.
And all the studio execs almost had a stroke when they saw that.
I bet they did.
They did. I've seen the documentary when they were talking about that. When they saw the footage, it was like, That's not green screen.
Got their $1 million man flying, hurtling towards Earth there.
Yeah.
Now, you done a movie with Tupac and Jim Belushi, gang related, right?
Yes, I did.
Did you get a chance to work or speak with Tupac very much on that film?
Yeah, briefly, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And it was kind of unsettling in a way because the last time I saw Tupac, we did the scene where in the movie they find him on the ground, and
Mhm.
I play a DEA agent, and we're looking
Right.
at the wall where the blood, blood is, and the fragments of the skull with where he
Mhm.
was shot and all that. And then 2 weeks later, I found out what had happened, that he'd been shot for real. So it was kind of
So
bizarre.
I knew that was the last movie that he had filmed because I
Mhm.
believe I'm pretty sure it came out after his death, and that was the last one. So that was only a 2 week gap between that scene and
I'd
then
say
him dying.
somewhere, yeah, I'd say somewhere in there. Yeah, but wasn't that long after we finished that film that I
Wow.
heard. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? I was in a car, someone was driving me somewhere, and like, yeah, you didn't hear about it? I know nothing about it. And I thought, well, the last time I saw him, he was play acting his death in this film we did called Gang Related, and that was the last time I saw Tupac.
Wow. Now I thought the pairing of him and Belushi was a little odd, but they made it work in that film. Belushi played a great dirty cop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
he's
he's a great
actually
guy.
got his own pot farm out there now. He's growing pot.
Oh no! Oh wow! Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey,
Yes,
whatever
Belushi
works.
Farms. Belushi Farms. He's doing it big. I think he's in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on the
Yeah,
location, but I
if
do
you're gonna
know
do
he's
it, if you're gonna do it, that's the place to do it.
yeah.
That's the place to do it. Yeah. Wow,
Uh,
man.
another good one that you were in that was always one of my favorites too was In Too Deep with
Oh
LL
yeah.
and Omar Epps.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
everybody always has that debate of who's the greatest rapper or actor. And while Tupac is definitely in that conversation, LL can't be far from right there, if not the best, because I thought, especially in that movie, he embodied that role of God so good. Like you could just tell when people just take to a role, and he took to that role. Did you have any experiences on that film with LL or any of the other guys?
No, the only person I really had experiences with was Omar Epps because I had those are the scenes, and
Right.
I met Pam Grier. She was very nice to me, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, Karina Ariave. I met her. She was in that film as well, and yeah. So, but yeah, I remember Omar being very polite and just a gentleman,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it was just it was I felt like we were making something that had value. I felt the creative aspect of it held together. And you can tell when you're doing sequences, when the actors are on point and they know their stuff. And there
Right.
was high tension. I could feel it. When we did the scene where we realized he's a cop, and we got to pull out the guns on him and all that.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't disrespectful. He played it realistically, but he didn't have to. Some people they don't know how to utilize the craft. They dig into their own personal, thingamajig, and then they become arrogant, and they
Mm-hmm.
think that method, they think that's appropriate, and sometimes people get hurt when you do that, and that's not cool. When you forget that people are human and it's a dance and it's play
Yeah.
pretend, you can't really be hurt people for real for the sake of your own glory. But I didn't experience anything like that with Omar. He was actually very nice, like I said to me, and we had a good time making it. And I watched the sequence, and I thought, wow, that was intense, man. That
Yeah,
was
and even at
intense.
the end of that sequence, he refused to believe that he was a cop. And I've talked to undercover officers on this channel before, and they've told me their stories when they're so good at what they do that even when like they would walk in a room and say, "Hey, I'm with DEA, ATF, or whatever," some of the people just wouldn't believe them because they were so believable in their facade, I guess, if you will, of being whatever they were portraying at the time, be it a biker or a mobster or whatever. And that is the mark of really being able to do good undercover work, is even when you find out, you refuse to believe it.
Well, if you go deep enough, man, you start to recognize things that confuse the mind, which is that, in my opinion, that this idea of good borrows its virtue from evil.
Exactly.
And if once you start
100%.
to realize that they're not, that there's a lot of gray there, and the poles aren't separate, they start to come together. You go, wait a minute. Kind of like some of my brothers who served over in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. they come into realization when they witness some things over there and come back to the United States, and then not being taken that good care of by their own government that sent them to do things kind of indicative of what we did in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
or what some other people did in World War II, kicking doors in and taking people out of their homes. So I don't know, man. It's a moral thing. It's a political thing. I don't get into it, but I will say, to the point that you speak, that yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, I was a cop, and I remember what it was like, because I was busting dudes for drugs, man. I had my dog King was not only a tack dog, he was a drug dog. So I'd go through the barracks, and he'd sniff, the bunk beds. He'd sniff, and then sometimes he'd alert. Next thing I'm arresting somebody, man. So I was not well liked. I was a narc, man.
Yeah.
And then, there were people that I liked, but I couldn't hang out with them because they were dirty, man. But I liked them, and the people that were supposedly good, I didn't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So I found myself in a really weird world, man. And then when I left that island, I heard that some of my commanding officers got arrested for some stuff, and some people ended up in federal prison. So you start to realize these instincts you have may not be so imaginary. And
Right.
So anyway, I don't know, man. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't. I respect any man who has the soul power, or the strength of psyche to go into that hell and to try to find any kind of ministry of logic in there, or there is none, or withstand the hypocrisy of that world.
Yeah.
And not snitch, because you can't. You got to be quiet.
And I think that's why a lot of them get lost in that.
You can't say nothing. You can't say nothing. Can't say nothing. Can't turn. Can't turn. You're a snitch. Got no snitch on my back. I'm doing my number. You do your number. We know who you guys. You do what you do, but we don't want So there's fragmentation. This idea of good, and then sometimes good abuses its power. And then, like in that movie Prophecy, when what's his name says to Archangel Gabriel, says, "Your war is about arrogance. That makes it evil. That's mine." So as soon as the law becomes arrogant, then it's not righteous anymore. It's not balanced in what it perceives. It has its own agenda. And I think men who get involved in that kind of world, they realize that this idea of good guy and bad guy, man, it's like a cartoon reel, man. That's why people say to me, "You played a bad guy," I laugh in their face. I said, "You don't know what world you're living in, man." So what does that mean? That the people running the country are the good guys?
Yeah, they're probably the most corrupt out of all of them.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I'm the honest guy.
Yeah.
Meaning, like Chino said in Scarface, he says, "Hey, you need people like me so you can point your
Your fucking fingers, yeah.
Bad guy, right? But what does that make you?
Yeah.
Does that make you good? So you got to be careful with these terms. I don't know if there's any altruism in terms of humanity's struggle to come into awareness and manifest the light. Man has been struggling for thousands of years with his own equanimity, not to behave like an animal. And then we put costumes on people and we delegate, well, this is the good one, this is the hero that go after. So in a sense, we create cosmic theater as a demonstration of ideally what we'd like to happen. But the reality is, are we really manifesting that?
Yeah.
Or we gotten so pulled into that screen we watch, thinking that this kumbaya thing that Hollywood do now, by putting everybody together, this multicultural experience. Yeah, man, we're all together now. And I'm hearing stories, man, that have nothing to do with what I witnessed on that screen, man. Actually, complete opposite of that. It's a fairy tale, man. Now, I'm not trying to be bitter. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just being realistic.
No, absolutely. And I think that lends itself to, like, I think about shows like The Sopranos and Sons of Anarchy, where the viewers find themselves pulling and rooting for the bad guy. And I'll say right now, Sopranos is probably one of my most favorite TV shows of all time. And, people love James Gandolfini. And at the end of the day, if you step back and look at it, he was a bad fucking dude. Like, he constantly cheated on his wife. He killed multiple people. I mean, he done a lot of bad shit, but people loved him. And same thing with Sons of Anarchy. Those guys done a lot of bad stuff, but people loved him and they gravitated to him because their personalities were strong. And it was what it was. That was in the mob. It wasn't like killing for one stranger to another. To them, it was business, where in my world, if I don't do something right, my boss is going to fire me and send me home. And that world, if you don't do something right, unfortunately, the alternative is death. And a lot like that in the biker world too. But it's crazy how much fanfare that those people got. You weren't rooting for the cops to bust any of those in any of those shows. You were always rooting for the bad guy. So you actually got a chance to work with Clint Eastwood in The Mule.
Yes.
What was that like working with Eastwood? Because I mean, you want to talk about legends. I mean, that's a legend right there.
Yeah, that's another example of a surreal experience. Is this really happening?
Yeah.
So we're all a little bit intimidated. And then when I met Andy Garcia, it was the same thing. He was sitting there, just, unassuming. He said, "Hi, I'm Andy." And I shook his hand. I said, "It's an honor to meet you, sir." And he put his hand up by the back of my head like some old uncle. I won't say old, some uncle, some family uncle that had an affection for me. The way he touched the back of my head, man, I could feel that he appreciated that I called him sir. And that in that moment, he could feel how he affected me as a performer. He felt all of that. And he embraced it rather than shushing it away. His ability to embrace it and show me love and give the same thing back, love and respect, was really beautiful. It was the same thing with Clint Eastwood. He was unassuming, gentle, and just like a ghost. He was there and not there at the same time. One eye was on directing, the other eye was the character.
Right.
And you knew he was there, but you really couldn't really find him. And you didn't want to try to find him. You just wanted to do a good job. And
Right.
when we first got on set, I think everybody felt like, okay, don't mess up. It's kind of like take that first shot. You're in combat. Don't shake. There's the target. Bang. It's like delivering the first line to Clint. Make sure you deliver it right. Don't stutter. Don't forget the line, because you're not just firing at any target. You're firing at a target that has significant value. If you miss that shot, the world ends.
Mm-hmm.
Your world ends.
Yeah.
And this man, who's not just a man, he's an institution. He's all sorts of things. He's gotten into your psyche over the years, because you watch how many movies that he's been in: Good, Bad, the Ugly, Dirty Harry. He directed, Breezy. I mean, I go down a catalog of movies that people, what is it? Play Misty for Me. He wasn't just an actor; he was a director. He's done so many things, so prolific, that you're not just meeting the man; you're meeting all the body of work that has infiltrated or kind of worked its way into your psyche, man. And so you got to overcome that in a way, but at the same time be present to it. And I found that to be the most challenging aspect, not to be so in awe of who I was standing in front of, that I could not do my work. I could not become Emilio, not become this guy who had to, in a way, almost not patronize him, but hey, old man, you don't know how to text, man.
Yeah.
And so there was a part of me that was like, wow, man. But once I took out my magic wand, it was like any other show, man. I just got deep into it, and he saw that I got deep into it. He went as deep as I went with me. And the cool thing about Clint Eastwood was that when I started to go off page, off the script, I started ad-libbing, he went right with me, because I just started playing jazz, man. I just decided in the scene to throw another line and do something different, to show him that I was so immersed in the material in the moment, and I could get back on the page as quickly as I got off. And he saw that, and he did it with me, man. And so my friend, a colleague of mine, said to me, there were some of those moments that were improvised, weren't they? Yeah, I could tell, man, because there was a natural ebb and flow with you guys. The way you were interacting felt very relaxed and natural, man. I said, yeah. And some directors and movie stars, if you steer from the path this much, you get a shellacking.
Yeah.
Stick to the script, stick to the dialogue, stick to this. I found him to be a very open-minded, very actor's director, man, because he allowed you that freedom and room to experience the moment without limitation. He didn't lord over you. Hey, I'm Clint Eastwood, do it my way. He allowed the scene and the crew as well. They allowed the whole thing to breathe and find its own way. And it did, man. And it was magic. And afterwards, he was so just like chill. And I remember when we broke for lunch, I saw a man standing in the back of the line, old man, and I realized it was Clint Eastwood. He had literally placed himself at the back of the line and let everybody go in front of him to eat their lunch. And then when he finally sat down to eat his lunch, he sat with the crew. He wasn't ushered away by some security. There wasn't anybody around him to tell him, stay away from Clint Eastwood. He was so approachable, yet you didn't want to approach him.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to respect the man and give the man his space. So he commanded that power, but didn't lord it over anybody. He was just there.
Yeah.
He's like a bodhisattva, man. You knew he was enlightened, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt after you, once you realized everything was cool, you got over your being starstruck, and oh man, I'm making a movie with Clint Eastwood. You got into it. It was just beautiful, man. It was
And that's
beautiful.
good that he let you guys improv, and you obviously
He
being a
let me
veteran
improv.
actor. Yeah.
He let me improv.
Yeah.
The rest of them stuck to the book. I was the one.
Well,
And when
and
I
that's
got, let me explain something to you, because sometimes when you do these movies, they're not the production, the producers, directors aren't clear where they want to place people.
right.
So actors are placed in a position where you got to fight for position. You're placed in a circumstance where you got to fight for position. I thought to myself, well, I'm going to take control of this scene, man. And I did. And they saw that. And the next day they said, you're going to, okay, clearly Clint noticed some things about what you were doing. So now you're the one running the garage. You're in charge of shit.
Right.
But originally it was ambiguous. They weren't sure which guy was running shit. So when I stepped up, I made sure to take it, own it, make it mine, and blow the rest of them off the road like Death Race.
Yeah.
I didn't care about the rest of them. It was me and Clint, and I knew in my mind and in my heart what I had to do, and I did it. And he saw that. And so in that sense, I was immediately promoted on the day. The next day, you're here now. So
Well, that came through on the screen.
Because I was not afraid to go off book. I was not afraid to. Everything I've been doing prior to, I forgot he was Clint Eastwood, man. I said, I'm what I am. He wants me to play this. He wants it real. He's going to get real, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get right in on him. But I'm not going to do it in a way that's over the top. I'm going to do it in a really, like, very charming way, you know? And he saw that and he goes, oh, shit. He's kind of, and that's what he noticed. The rest of them, I'm not disrespecting them, but I saw them doing the mechanics of it because I could see they were afraid, and I saw what they were doing. And I saw, okay, I know what to do. It's a chess game, man.
Yeah.
I hate to say it because acting, unfortunately or fortunately, in my business, it's not a team effort. It's a track and field event sometimes, and you gotta get there first or you lose. You
right.
can't necessarily. Now, when you do a collaboration of an independent film, sometimes then maybe you can work together and everybody raises the level of the scene because everyone has their own input and raises the frequency of that scene and that dialogue. In certain such situations, you will fall back into a caricature if you do not step up front and say, fuck this caricature shit. I'm going to take control of this. I'm going to own it. And I'm going to make it real. You got to do that. You can't wait for them to anoint you. You anoint yourself in your truth and who you are. And I've been all these years of doing this thing. You think I'm suddenly going to forget where I've been, who I've been with? Yeah. You know, I brought all, just like Clint brought his whole life and his legacy. I brought whatever, little thing I brought. To me, it's not little. It's like blood, bro. Whether it's a bathtub full of blood or a drop, it's still blood, man. So you bring blood to blood. Blood knows blood and sees itself and goes, wow, man, this dude is really in it. And that's what you do, man. Otherwise, you get left behind.
Well, I can tell you that came through on the scene. You could tell right off the bat that once he entered that garage, the man that he needed to talk to was you. It was very clear as a viewer and as someone watching that film that when he pulled in that garage, you was the guy in charge. So that was very well done and very well delivered by you. So kudos.
I appreciate the compliment.
Now, another one that was, in my opinion, I feel like you kind of got to still play, a badass, but you got to stretch your legs a little bit with some different stuff, but there was comedic aspects to it too, was your role in Nip Tuck. I mean, I love that role. Obviously I can't speak for you, but was that one of your most favorite roles that you've ever done, or is up there?
I'm going to go back to my original thought on this subject, because I know you'd asked me this prior to that, Chip, about if I had something in particular that I have an affection for, and I would say no, I don't. I never watched the show really that much. I was afraid to. I was afraid to. I didn't even go to the premiere of Death Race, that movie I was in. I didn't go see it. I enjoy the process. I remember when we were filming it, Nip Tuck, that there were moments where I felt poetic flight. I was like, wow, that was a great take. And I knew I was in the presence of genius with Ryan Murphy
Mm-hmm.
in the way that he was directing. And I could tell with the other actors too, their ability, their skill set was really A plus, you know. And I thought, okay, I'm finally in a ring now with some real fighters, man.
Mm-hmm.
None of these hacks, you know, pretending something, whatever. These guys were the real deal. I said, great, finally I can get down, you know, and all the stuff I've been taught can utilize and throw that away too, and then just, you know, let it take over. And so it just felt like, you know, like it just, all the stuff I had done prior to that, these characters that lived in this world, this kingpin, this overlord, this gangster guy, whatever you want to label him. All these shows I did prior to that, the CSI, the, you know, Boomtown. I go down a whole. I was doing all kinds of episodic stuff on television though in those days, where there's a characters similar to Escobar,
Mm-hmm.
that to me were just training ground for
Yeah.
the ultimate fight. The only difference, the only thing was, I didn't know it was a championship fight. I went into it like any other thing, fully committed, ready to fight, and I didn't really concern myself. I'm not like one of these people. I don't even call myself an actor. I'm not one of these performers that pays attention to who's in it. You know, I don't go into the analytics of casting or the significance of the show. I don't let that, to me, that just interferes with my creative process, man. And it's not spiritual. It lives in a bank somewhere,
Yeah.
because it's all about evaluating, well, who's in this, I don't care who's in it. I know that I'm given a task. I read the material. I envision it. Imagination takes hold of it. And I know the director and the writer definitely wants me to honor the material and bring it to life, bring it up off the page. The director's watching to see how I do that. They're all observing how I interpret their vision, and if I bring it to life in a way that, one, honors them, two, blows their mind, because they go, wait a minute, Robert, yeah, you're doing stuff with this character Escobar that we didn't conceive when we wrote this. Really? Yeah. So we're going to bring you back, and then we're going to bring you back some more because you're doing. I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing. I was simply taking the training that Anthony Abeson handed me, the book with all the tools that I've been practicing for years, and, you know, practicing. You know, you keep grinding at it, grinding, and here was an opportunity to just get in the ring again. I didn't know though the significance of the ring I was standing in until people started noticing me on the street. Go, hey, Nip Tuck, and I go, oh, okay. I guess this is making some impact, man. But to me, in terms of that disposition, it was just the same, more or less a similar geography I was playing in. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic, Latino character. You know, he's got these certain qualities about him. You know, he's a womanizer. He's the drugs and I'm like, okay, I know this world. Okay, and and it was just simply conjuring another version of that. It's like you're looking at an object, right?
Yeah.
This idea of character, Robert LaSardo. But if you turn the object from different perspectives, you see the object from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So he's always doing the same thing. I know. If you turn the object this way, you see a side of it you didn't see before. You turn it this way, you see a side of it from this perspective. If you're looking at it this way, you can't see the back of it. So I wanted to find aspects of the same, of what people think is the same thing, that were different, that are not like the other incarnation, because the circumstances are different.
Right.
There's so many other variables that play into the building, the construct of that character arc. And the more intricate and in-depth the writing is, the more room I have to invent and play. Now, if they don't give me that, I've always been very good at communicating without words.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I tell a lot of actors. Well, I don't have a lot of lines. Don't worry about the lines. What do you mean? Communicate. You know, you can just stare at somebody and there's a whole inner dialogue going on, man. Do that. And they will feel the impact of that gaze. And they'll go, whoa, there's a lot going on with this person. So I never let the lines define what I was doing. I never let this, what people call this, is it a big role? Is it a little role? Has nothing to do with it. Has everything to do with the kind of impact you make. You know, like a bullet is small, but when you aim it at a target, if you hit the target right, changes everything, right? Same thing. People don't remember a lot of the details in the movies they watch. They forget the names, they even forget the actors' names, but they remember moments in film that make impact because it goes pow, and they, whoa, wow, man, I felt that. I remember that scene in that movie. You remember when they remember that? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's not a lot of dialogue going on with that. It could just be a look. You know,
Yeah.
right when Al Pacino's looking through the car window, right before the dude's getting in the car, and you know, there's a bomb under the car, and just staring. I never forgot that look in his eye. He didn't say nothing. It was just the way he looked through the, not at the lens, he looked through the lens.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized what he had to do. He was not crazy. And when he saw those two kids and realized, oh shit, I'm not going to just kill this guy. I'm going to kill this family. And it suddenly dawned on him, holy shit, this is really bad. His whole interpretation of that scenario and circumstance changed his disposition. That was fascinating to watch. And it wasn't a monologue, a dialogue, man. They were
Right.
moments that he played very realistically, and they stay with you. And that's what I realized, that if they're not in the writing going to allow me the proper verbiage to communicate a character that has 3 dimensions, I'm going to create those dimensions in the way I manifest in front of the camera, because the camera reads that. That's why silent film, before sound, there was something called silent black and white movies. People would love to watch them because so much was communicated in the eyes, the
Mm-hmm.
soul, the expressions, the body language. When you start to master that aspect of the art form without words, then you can really sneak it in on them, man, without the words. So you don't let the words get in the way.
Yeah, that's another thing as we spoke of earlier that I think sometimes might go unnoticed by the general public, but those that look a little bit deeper, there are actors that, like you said, can work a scene with their eyes and just, you know, a certain gaze, a certain look, their body language can speak louder than any dialogue they can be given. And it's all about your presence and how you do it. And that's one thing that uh I think speaks to your brilliance, is because you have, like you said, been cast in similar roles, but yet you bring something different to each one. And if it was just a role as, okay, well, this is, you know, just a drug dealer or whatever, then you could get anyone to play that role, because anyone can come in there and do that. But you bring so much more to that role. You enhance whatever part it is they give you into something more, and that speaks to your brilliance, because obviously if you were just an average guy that didn't put forth the extra effort that you do, you wouldn't keep getting all the roles that you have. And I mean, anybody that takes a look at your IMDb, I mean, you'll scroll till your fingers get tired.
I appreciate the compliment, Chip. Like I said earlier, some people have the corporation behind them. You know,
Yeah.
people don't understand the power of the corporation. Say, why don't you do this? How come you're not on this show? I don't make the decisions, man. I don't have
Right.
that kind of power. I'm not friends with a lot of the people that were in power in the 90s and even into the early 2000s are gone now. The
Right.
producers that had an affection for me. There's a whole new generation of producers and people that have power and make decisions for whatever reason. So, you know, unless, like I said, you're connected, like I was talking about earlier, like in the prisons, with the
Mm-hmm.
gangs and the cliques and the circles in Hollywood. If you have a corporation or a power entity behind you, they can groom you and create a career for you and emancipate you. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that, you stay in the Charlie Manson cage with a perception that people have that are not so intelligent, that think you're limited based on that situation. When in fact, Manson transcended the walls of that cage because his name lives in what people perceive as infamy.
Mm-hmm.
And why do they remember that? What did he do that was so profound, that moved through the prison gates, through the walls, into the minds of many, and had people wondering, is he the devil? Or is he just a prophet? Or is he just crazy? Or is he, what is he? The fact that people even ask those questions indicate to me there's a lot more than what meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So he was his own person in that sense. And I feel some of us have to find a way to communicate in our own truth that frequency of the art form the best way we know how, because they're not being given any help to do it, man. So
Right.
you're on your own in that sense. The people who are afforded, you know, opportunities because they have a culturism behind them and they're moving an entire generation because of what they're selling. I don't know how much of it has to do with acting sometimes. I think as much as it has to do with a political statement or a social statement. There are other things at play now in terms of casting that determine why certain people are in the positions they're in and others are not.
Mm-hmm.
And once you understand that, you don't even take it personal anymore. You just realize the game is rigged to some degree.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, the cool thing about that is it may be rigged, but it still doesn't They can tell you what to say. They can even try to tell you what to think, but they can't change the way you think unless you let them. So in that sense, you always have the freedom to communicate the humanity of any character, good or bad, whatever that means,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's realistic, man. Because when you communicate a reality, you talking about the Sons of Anarchy and these Italian dudes on the Sopranos and all. I know, listen, some people romanticize that lifestyle. I don't, because I know dudes that ride bikes. I
Mm-hmm.
know dudes that hung out in those shops and ate all the, Italian dudes and all that. And I'm not saying anything bad about them. If you romanticize that phenomenon, then you might find those shows interesting. I might find them interesting. I never really watched them because I didn't need to watch them, because I knew people that rode bikes. I was in situations with people who lived that lifestyle. So to me, watching a movie about it, there was nothing new for me to discover in there, other than maybe, are they playing it realistically?
Right.
Are they playing it realistically? Are the writers and the creators of the show, are they leaning this way? What are they doing, man? So for those of us who know how it really is, it's a harder sell, man. You know what I mean? But I
Yeah.
understand why certain shows live in history books, because people fantasize about being rebels. Like people always fantasize about Bonnie and Clyde and the bank robbers, because people feel oppressed. And there's a
Absolutely.
part of them that wants to break out and become outlaw. Outlaws are like God, because outlaws, they are outside the law. They do not care about the consequence. The true outlaw does
Mm-hmm.
not care about being killed. Will die for the club. Will die for the this thing of ours. Like the Italians, the way the Italians, when they were really, what they used to believe in before they started stitching each other out.
Yeah.
So the point is that commitment to the agreement and the checks and balances, I think people who have some type of code respect the men and women who live by that code. Because if you don't, Tony's going to come whack you, man. That kind of thing. You're gonna catch a shotgun on the back of your. Someone's van's gonna pull up, shotgun's gonna come out. You're gonna get blown off your bike.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that way too. So I think people admire the outlaw, hero worship the outlaw, but always on some level are waiting for their ultimate demise. That's the paradox of it.
Yeah.
They're waiting to see them. This dude's getting, he's getting into, he's starting to go to his head. He's getting to, he thinks he's God, and boom, somebody, another evil, a greater evil comes and eats that evil, and it just keeps perpetuating itself. And to me, after a while, it gets kind of boring. Lessons in evil to me,
Yeah.
because the world we live in is that, in a sense, and it isn't. There's
It,
aspects of it that are beautiful and heavenly, the trees, the oceans, so, places that aren't polluted. And there's aspects of humanity that continue to create conflict. And I think people definitely find their entertainment in that, especially the people who socially have felt oppressed their whole lives. They need a champion to go out into the world to rob a bank, to knock someone out in the ring, to win a game in sport. They need somebody that they feel is speaking their frustration and winning, so they can live vicariously through this fantasy of being that person. And
mm-hmm.
they're winning. They're no longer shackled by their mundane everyday lives. They get to live vicariously through these outlaws or these bank robbers, these gangsters, these sports heroes, whatever they deem deity in the
Right.
world of show. People will glorify it because they can project into it and feel that they are that too in their imagination, like every child does. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, it's beautiful, but it also can be really dangerous, man, if you can't discern the reality from the fiction, man.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people nowadays that have that problem.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, and I've never been one to subscribe to the belief that movies can, control people to do certain things. But at the end of the day, sometimes, man, people watch a movie or watch a TV show and it just kind of overtakes them, and they project, what they're seeing on screen, not realizing that when that scene is over, it's cut and that person is an actual person. You weren't Escobar, you're Robert LaSardo. And sometimes people can take it too far, but you don't never know what's going on inside that particular person. There could be something that triggered it. That just happened to be, it was already there. It was about to tip. And once they seen a certain scene on TV, that sent them over the edge. It's unfortunate. I don't necessarily blame that particular film, but I think that's where mental health comes in, that needs to be looked in a little bit more deep, because it is a very big problem in the country right now. Mental health and overdosing. I think I was reading a stat today. They said 11 people an hour is what the average is for overdosing right now in this country. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's sad, man. A lot of the brothers that come back from the war have committed suicide because of what they've seen over there too. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
don't forget about that too. But you know what though? I don't know. You were talking about movies earlier. You have a collection of 7,000 DVDs and all that and stuff. And I told you how much I respect you for your knowledge of film. I don't know how far back you go. Do you remember an actor named Burt Lancaster?
That name sounds very, very familiar.
Yeah, he did there was a movie called From Here to Eternity.
Yeah, From Here to Eternity. Yeah.
And do you remember another actor named Kirk Douglas?
Yes.
Okay. There was an interview years ago between the two of them. They were talking about the social conscience,
mm-hmm.
or the responsibility of the artists in movies in relationship to the people and what it communicates, and the influence of media and movies on the collective oversoul and the psyche. And Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas didn't really agree on this point, because Kirk Douglas felt, look, we're just entertainers, man. It's not our business to be concerned about the impact or the influence of what we do on the people. And Burt Lancaster said, no, we do have a responsibility as artists to consider what we're doing and the impact it makes and how it influences people and what they believe and what they see, because it's such a powerful medium. So I never forgot that conversation they had. That's a little bit of a debate they had between one guy saying, no, it's none of my business, and the other guy says, it is your business. And so and this was years ago, man. I think it was black and white footage, or that's how old it was. And so this has been going on for a while, this dialogue about, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Mm-hmm. And my thinking is that I can't answer that any more than anybody else can, unless it's from a subjective position. Then I declare myself deity. I'm not a deity. I don't know the answer, but I do feel though that it is important for us to mind our children, the innocent ones, in terms of what they observe, because of the power of it and the nature of it. And so I think it's very important, that system of standards, what they call standards and practices, that parents that raise the children have to keep an eye on the children, because if the children are witnessing homicides, 10 homicides a day in these fictional shows, then after a while their programming becomes all kind of screwed up. We're not raising them right. Why does a child raise up and kill his parents? We ain't raising them right. So I think the influence of television shows that are graphic and violent, if young people are exposed to that, they become desensitized to the cause and effect of that, and then wonder why suddenly the ruination of their lives are before them. And I think in that sense we have to be careful what we communicate in that. And when I remember, and I'll put a period on this, but I remember I went to Angola State Penitentiary. I was filming a movie down there, and I walked down death row, and the ward took me to meet some of the inmates. And I never remember how ashamed I felt, and like there was a spotlight on me, and they were happy to see me and respected me, and I felt like a fraud. I felt horrible, because I saw these men, some of them very talented, handing me canvases of art that they had been doing, because they're there for forever. And they honed in on this creative ability. And I thought to myself, I'm portraying men like this in certain shows, and they respect me because I'm representing something, the pain, the struggle, because of how I grew up, because I grew up in the ghetto, and I grew up in situations, social situations, where easily I could have went the wrong way and ended up like that too. So I think they respect that maybe I was able to overcome the odds, beat the odds, so to speak. But yet I felt not good seeing them behind bars. It made me sad. I felt not good about it. I was not proud. Yeah, here I am. And, I felt ashamed. I remember that.
Yeah, that's got to be a surreal feeling to meet these guys and know that, they're not getting out of there, and sooner or later, could possibly, be put to death. And that has got to be a feeling that would grab you and twist you up a little bit mentally, knowing that you play a lot of these guys. But at the same time, it's cool that they respected you, though.
Yeah, and I can appreciate. I walked through down Broadway and everybody was cool with me, man. I was walking around the prison, but the point is that people tend to glamorize this thing. They
Hmm.
make songs about it, rap songs and all this stuff. And anybody, back in the day when I grew up in I was living in the project in the '70s. The music back then, Grandmaster Flash, the Furious Five, all these people, Rob Bass, they were making music to bring Black people out of the darkness into the light. The music was designed like a form of poetry. They were prophets to communicate a frequency to liberate people, all people, not just Black people, and take them out of the darkness and tell them and say, listen, man, you're going to end up like this if you do this.
Hmm.
And then later on down the road, they're making music that's taking the people and putting them back in the darkness.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like there's a certain social responsibility that has to be observed. People can tell me, hey, go F yourself. I don't care, man. Your kids are going to bear that sin, man. Your kids are going to bear whatever you think is, it's all good in the hood and all this nonsense and all this posturing of whatever, of some subhuman animal, primal thing that you feel is making a statement. Is all it's going to do is contaminate the psyche of your kids and make them crazy, man. And then you can't control them. Well, I wouldn't say control them. You can't communicate to them with reason because you've communicated to them doctrines of things that are not reasonable at all.
Right.
You've gone crazy, and your children are taking a lead from you, and you got to be careful with that, man. If the adults can't be the example in terms of morality and how to live, then where are they going to get their example from? The television, from movies, man? Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some movies out there that have a message that communicates hope and mercy and all that. And there's a lot of them that don't. And I don't
Yeah.
understand how some of these filmmakers, and I work with some of them, how they sleep at night and they got kids making these movies that are all about like the degradation of humanity, the tearing down literally of the fabric of humanity, like Nero. Back in the days of the Roman Empire, Nero,
Hmm.
he opened up the games after Marcus Aurelius died. He reopened up, and he would have floats of women, Mediterranean women on floats, beautiful women waving at the crowds, right? And all the men are looking, everybody's looking at the beauty. And then he'd let loose the lions into the arena, and the lions would attack the women and rip them apart. Everybody would just go crazy because of the bloodlust. And Nero was the instigator. He was he propagated this.
Hmm.
And so, I'm just saying, take a lesson from the Romans, man. This is how things can get to that extreme. You got to be careful when things like that start happening.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What
Now,
did Shakespeare say? The fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. So you can say, why, God, why? I say, yo, man, no, dig yourself. What did House of Pain say in that one song? It's time, go clean up your own backyard before you
yeah.
start knocking on your
Knocking on
neighbor's
your
door.
neighbor's door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. So I kind of feel like, as a performer at this stage in my career, well, it's not my career. God gave me something to do. I'm doing it. There are times I have to do work because I need to make a living like everybody else. And I'm not always proud of the results. I don't have control over it. That's why I decided to make my own movie. And whether people like it or not is inconsequential to me. I just needed to do it and be honest
Yeah.
about what I was communicating and be clear on that, so I could at least feel that when this leaves the planet, that whatever I have to meet in terms of the physics of my karma, I at least know that I tried to be honest as an artist and communicate something and entertain the people too. Because you got Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas, they were arguing about, well, how do you entertain the people while you're preaching to them? You can't preach to them, then you're a fundamentalist. And you can't go crazy with the pornography of film either. You got to find a balance between the two poles, man.
What one, and that kind of brings me to the next one I wanted to hit. Was that your short film, Riviera?
No, nope.
That was not yours, but you were in
No,
it, obviously, because I
no.
watched it today.
Yeah.
For a 16-minute short film, black and white, that thing was really powerful. I mean, in my opinion.
I agree. No, I agree with you. I watched
Because
it too, and I was blown away by it. J.Bo
when,
Scott, he did an incredible job, and everybody involved in that project was on point. They knew what they were doing. The director, everyone. I can see why it won all those awards.
yeah, I'm going to put a link to that.
I just wish they would have made it into a full-length feature.
No, I do too. I think that had the grounds and the ingredients to be a full length feature for sure. And I'm going to put that in the link to the show notes for this episode because it was really powerful. And I don't want to give too much away because I encourage people to go watch it, but to be up under the stress of that situation and to know what you wanted to be done to you, but at the same time, why, and like you understood it. I understood why you were requesting that to be done to you. And it was very powerful and it was very moving. And I encourage every one of our listeners to go take your 15 minutes and watch that. It's I can't recommend it enough. But outside of the movies and your illustrious career in film, you've actually got a few books too. And you wrote one was a Life Sentence.
Yes, sir.
We're going to put a link to that up too. And I apologize for not being able to read it before this interview, but I am going to order it and get to it because it speaks to kind of your career and what we went over here, you know, a life sentence in this movie industry. I mean, you want to tell our audience just a little bit about that before we close out?
Yeah, sure. It's a myriad of stories, basically. Experiences I had, my personal life, in the movie industry, and also just dark night of the soul. It's a confession, basically, and an apology.
Mm-hmm.
And the realization that a lot of the stuff I believed in, I thought the studio was the Godhead. I thought, I believed in the Wizard of Oz. I believed in all that stuff, and then I come to realize that I had been sold bill of goods. And so it's almost like I don't know. Yeah, it's a tribute to anyone who wants to know, at least from my point of view, what it's really like. There are people who write books, to glorify certain things or gossip aspects of things and all that. I didn't do that. I just wanted to communicate a truth, several of them, so that people would understand the journey and what it had been like for real, not what they imagined it to be and not what they're projecting on it to be. And then I had to take a good look at myself. So one day I looked in the mirror and I go, okay, let me write this down, because sometimes you look in the mirror, you like what you see. Sometimes you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see. And it's the same thing with American trash. I realized I have to. My friends say, "Okay, you wrote the book. You got to make a movie now, man. You got to keep looking in this mirror. What do you want to say to the people? What do you want to communicate to them? What's the struggle? So the life sentence it's a play on words.
Mm-hmm.
Life sentence. You go to jail for life, right? Or it's a life sentence. So all these words that some of I think aspects of my life's journey personally, the genesis of my life, people that have influenced me, affected me, how I've influenced myself, how I've influenced others, how I've hurt people, and having to come to terms and forgive myself for all that. So it's a story. Basically, it's a book about reclamation, reclaiming one's true self, whatever that is, and letting go of all the fairy dust, or wiping off all the fairy dust that has contaminated the soul, so that one can see clearly again that there's life outside of show business. So it's not celebrating show business, the antithesis of that. It's the deconstructing of the illusion that there's some magical place to go to. So for people who want to read a book about the glory of it's not a book about glory. It's the opposite. It's glory is fleeting, man.
Yeah.
And ask any combat vet, he'll tell you that. Or she'll tell you that glory is fleeting.
For sure. And that's one reason why I'm going to pick that up and read it. And like I said, I'm going to attach a link to that for any of our audience members that want to go check that out in the show notes of this show. Robert, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show. This has been a fantastic interview. The one thing that I respect so much about you is I seen this quote not too long ago, and I've shared it on my social medias. And it's like, I forget the exact wording of it, but in short, it basically says, somebody that is given opportunity will never look at things the same way as someone that had to go earn the opportunity, somebody that got it out of the mud. And, I think that's you, man. I mean, you got it out of the mud. Like you said earlier, you could have very easily took a different path that could have wound you up in a cell next to one of those guys that you were in prison visiting with, and that's to everybody. I mean, one bad choice, one wrong move here, one wrong move there. Everybody is one bad decision away from doing time in prison. You have a drink here at a restaurant, run a red light, you hit somebody, guess what? You're probably going to go to jail. And you was able to get around all that. You mentioned your acting coach a few times. He you know, was like you said, a surrogate father. He kind of set you on the path, and you know, you combated all these things and you went against the grain with it. You like you said, you come in with the tattoos. You were everything that probably people were saying you didn't need to be, and yet you still got it done. And hats off to you, my friend, for an illustrious career. And you're not done yet. I don't want to make it sound like I'm writing you off, because you got a lot more. You're pumping out more now than ever. I mean, in the independent film side of things, you've done a film with my pal Ciro DiPaggio down there, the Mob King. I mean, you got it coming out left and right.
Ciro. Hi, Ciro. What's up, bro? Shout out to Ciro.
Yes, sir, for sure. When can people expect your movie to drop that we've been discussing?
I'm in post-production sooner than later.
Sooner than later.
It's 2023.
All right. Any projects that should be coming out soon that you've been involved in, you want people to look out for?
Yeah, Brandon Slagle, a good friend of mine, who worked in collusion or conjunction with the Mahal Empire. Arena Wars is coming out next year. And then another film, a good friend of mine, Josh Weber, directed a film called Isaac. I'm really looking forward to it. I've seen the rough cut of this movie. It's brilliant. Starring R.J. Mitty, Dove Cameron, myself, and Gigi Gustin, who also is in my movie American Trash. She plays one of the leads in American Trash. She's in this film as well. So Isaac and Arena Wars next year.
Isaac and Arena Wars next year. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for this episode of Crime and Entertainment. Robert, I can't thank you enough for stopping by the show.
Can I just say one thing before we part company, sir?
Absolutely. Yes. Go right ahead.
I just want to give a salute to all the veterans, United States veterans in the country, for serving. I'm a former veteran, and I just want to salute y'all for the sacrifices you've made. I know you're suffering. Just hang in there. Okay? Hang in there, brothers and sisters. Okay? I respect you.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for your service. Thank everyone out there for their service, as Robert said. And, you know, again, I know I'm going to say it one more time before we get out of here, man. I appreciate you giving me your time today. I usually don't like to keep people this long, but it was a very good conversation, and you've got such knowledge that I wanted people to hear, and, you know, go a little bit past the character they see on TV, go a little bit past Escobar Gomez and some of these characters, and get to know Robert. And I think we've done that here. And again, I appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you, Chip. You have a wonderful holiday, brother. Be safe. God bless you, man.
Same to you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am Hollywood Wave. That was Robert LaSardo. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Tune in next week for an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. Robert, we appreciate it, my friend.
Take care. Peace.